Many of us in the financial sector have pledged for net zero emissions by 2050. But the urgency of 2050 is actually the urgency of now. The accompanying pledge we've made to halve emissions by 2030 means that serious steps already need to be taken in 2025. It means that we, governments, corporates, asset managers, as well as individual investors, can no further delay the tasks that lie ahead of us. It is why we at Robeco have focused and continue to focus heavily on climate, and why for the first time we've included climate as a factor in calculating our expected returns. The average holding period of assets is approximately 5 years, so today's choices will have a significant impact on your route to your 2030 milestones. But it's only through long-term vision and active stewardship that real-world impact can be created. It is obvious that there's a tension between the urgency of now and the role we as investors and individuals have in establishing that long-term commitment. It is challenging to make the right portfolio decisions today that will benefit the wealth as well as well-being of your investors and clients in the future. And while having sustainable ambitions is the essential first step, we also need to be aware of our limitations and keep our promises in line with what we can actually deliver. I trust that today's event will provide inspiration and a bit of guidance in a world that faces long-term disruption from climate change, while still dealing with short-term disruption from the pandemic. A world that provides opportunities for the committed, and even more so for the brave. We hope our insights will give you clarity to make the right decisions and the optimism to see them through. The future is in our hands. The future is sustainable. The future is now. It's time to act.
Started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Hola, buenos días. Bueno, esto me ha impresionado un poco y yo creo que se me ha olvidado lo que iba a decir. Pero no sé si eso o que después de estar trabajando 16 años con mi jefa Karen y estar trabajando en inglés y en holandés, ayer estábamos en un bar, se dio la vuelta y me dijo, Quillo, ¿me das una croqueta de jamón y una caña? Y digo, Karen, que hablas español así me lo podías haber dicho hace 16 años, yo creo, ¿no? Pero bueno. Os quiero dar los buenos días, la bienvenida, las gracias. Me hace muchísima ilusión veros. Hace un montón de tiempo que no veo a muchos. más de 1 año y medio. A otros he tenido la suerte de poder coincidir. Y quiero darle las gracias también a Sonia Pérez Castro, que es nuestra experta en sostenibilidad y que ha sido quien ha organizado todo esto. Ha hecho una propuesta de viaje que me parece fascinante y que la vamos a compartir. Nos propone una jornada de 90 minutos, que es el tiempo que da la vuelta a la ISS, el tiempo que tarda la ISS en dar la vuelta a la Tierra. Y durante esos 90 minutos, pues efectivamente, nos propone tomar distancia, irnos probablemente hasta la línea de Kármán, escuchar ese latido irregular, ver cómo esa línea azul cada vez está más frágil. Nos propone profundizar en el conocimiento, mirar hacia atrás, hacia adelante. Para mirar hacia atrás, yo no sé si algunos de vosotros os acordáis, hace 3 años hicimos unas sesiones con la Singularity y venía Mendizábal, que fue premio Príncipe de Asturias, y nos hablaba precisamente de la primera transición energética que hizo el hombre. Y fue cuando el Sapiens Sapiens expulsó del paraíso Neandertal. ¿Y sabéis por qué? Por el fuego, porque empezamos a utilizar el fuego a lo bestia. Y aquello marcó una transición muy fuerte. Y no sé cuál será la siguiente, no sé si la siguiente transición exponencial será la búsqueda del espacio o cuál. Pero entre medias, hoy tenemos un planeta cuyos pilares son 4 cosas. José Manuel, ¿tú sabes cuáles son o no? ¿No? Bueno, pues mira, el cemento, el plástico, la energía y el acero. Esos son los pilares que tenemos ahora mismo y que es de lo que está básicamente formado el planeta. Con lo cual, antes de pasar al siguiente ponente, creo que merece esa reflexión, ¿no? Vamos a tener que hacer una transición de emisiones ceros que desde luego va a ser muy larga, va a ser complicada.
Buenos días. Lo primero que quiero hacer es dar las gracias a las más de 200 personas que os habéis conectado hoy para ser partícipes de nuestro evento anual de Robeco, ¿no? El Robeco Become Sustainable Time to Act. Que además esta edición me hace especial ilusión porque la hacemos con Expansión, que es el líder indiscutible en prensa económica de este país. Y quería hacer una mención especial al equipo de unidad editorial que nos ha ayudado a hacer realidad este evento. Y también, por supuesto, dar las gracias a Andrea Carreras Candi, que nos acompaña hoy, y bueno, que es la directora de EFPA España, y que, bueno, pues la verdad ya sabes que te admiro muchísimo a ti y a todo tu equipo, y creo que nos va a dar unas claves muy importantes sobre formación. Y es que después del viaje que hemos hecho todos juntos a la línea de Kármán, podemos ver a nuestro planeta, un planeta frágil flotando en el universo, y al cual le acecha un gran riesgo, que es el riesgo del cambio climático. Todos sabemos que los gobiernos, las corporaciones, el sistema financiero están por fin trabajando en una para poder paliar el cambio climático y transitar hacia una economía de emisiones cero. Lo hemos podido comprobar las pasadas semanas en la unidad de la COP26, de la Conferencia de las Partes de Naciones Unidas, en la cual parece que los gobiernos pasan de discutir cómo transitar al cambio climático a realmente tomar medidas efectivas y operativas para transitar a ese modelo económico de emisiones cero. En la prensa podemos ver todos los días cómo grandes corporaciones y no tan grandes se comprometen por llegar a emisiones cero de aquí a unos cuantos decenios. Por ejemplo, Robeco acaba de publicar su hoja de ruta para llegar a esas emisiones cero de aquí a 2050. Y el sistema financiero se sabe que es básico para poder transitar a una economía de emisiones cero, ya que somos responsables de reasignar los activos de manera responsable para conseguir este reto, pues que al fin de cuentas pues necesita una financiación importante. Pero bueno, tampoco me quiero alargar mucho, ya que este evento trata sobre esto, y quiero centrarme en Andrea, en EFPA, ¿no? Es verdad que las reglas del juego, Andrea, están cambiando, que efectivamente, bueno, pues la inversión sostenible, nosotros pensamos que ha llegado aquí para quedarse, pero ¿qué piensas tú? ¿Qué piensas? ¿La inversión sostenible opinas que ha llegado aquí para quedarse? Y si es así, ¿qué tipo de certificaciones podría hacer el banquero para poder formarse mejor?
Muchas gracias, Sonia, Ana y Javier, por haberme invitado a participar en este gran evento. Es un placer para EFPA estar hoy aquí. Respondiendo a tus preguntas, el tema de la sostenibilidad, por supuesto, ha llegado para quedarse. Cuando hace 3 años ni habíamos oído hablar del tema, ahora en el sector financiero se ha convertido casi en trending topic. Y yo creo que es muy importante tomar conciencia en el tema del mundo sostenible si queremos dejar un mundo mejor para nuestros hijos.
¿Y sabes, habéis creado alguna certificación específica para los banqueros para que se puedan formar en este tema tan importante?
Sí, efectivamente los asesores financieros están haciendo una gran labor para introducir el mundo de las finanzas sostenibles y realizar recomendaciones de inversión a sus clientes. Yo, por ejemplo, llevándolo al terreno personal, mi asesor financiero me recomendó traspasar mi plan de pensiones que tenía invertido en renta variable en el IBEX 35 a un plan de pensiones sostenible. De esta manera tomo conciencia de que mis ahorros son más solidarios y he mantenido mi rentabilidad. Con respecto a las certificaciones profesionales, como sabéis, desde EFPA tenemos las 4 certificaciones de MiFID, que son LIA, LIP, LFA y LFP. Las 4 fueron incluidas en el listado de la CNMV como aptas, en el caso de LIA para informar y en el caso de LIP, EFA y FP para informar y asesorar. En 2019, y tras la entrada en vigor de la nueva ley del contrato de crédito inmobiliario, EFPA España fue incluido en el listado para poder ofrecer las certificaciones EFPA LCCI Asesor y EFPA LCCI Informador. Y desde este año, y como novedad, hemos lanzado la certificación EFPA Esg Advisor.
Pues muy interesante.
Sí, hemos ya realizado 2.000 exámenes desde principios de año y las próximas convocatorias serán en diciembre. Además, estamos trabajando en una certificación en finanzas sostenibles de mayor nivel, le llamaremos EFPA Esg Expert. Estará más enfocado a corporaciones y a grandes instituciones. Y también como novedad y de cara al primer trimestre del año que viene lanzaremos nuestra certificación EFPA en seguros.
Bueno,
así que así tenemos todo el abanico de formación para los asesores financieros.
Yendo a un tema muy práctico, porque yo sé que los banqueros, los asesores, pues disponen de poco tiempo porque están trabajando de cliente en cliente. ¿Cuánto tiempo efectivo tardarían, necesitarían para sacarse esa certificación de manera exitosa?
A ver, como sabéis, desde EFPA no impartimos la formación preparatoria para nuestros exámenes, sino que disponemos de centros de formación acreditados que previamente han sido valorados y evaluados por un comité de acreditación y certificación. Ellos son los que valoran que el nivel de exigencia es el adecuado, que el nivel de profesorado pues, es un nivel alto, y estos centros acreditados pueden llevar el sello y pueden utilizar el logo de EFPA y decir que son acreditados de EFPA España. Con respecto a la certificación EFPA Esg Advisor, contamos con 4 centros de formación acreditados. Toda la información está disponible en nuestra página web. Contamos con un centro de formación en Valencia, la Fundación de Estudios Bursátiles y Financieros de Valencia, con un centro acreditado en Barcelona, que es el Instituto de Estudios Financieros, y con 2 en Madrid, que es el Instituto de Estudios Bursátiles y la Escuela de Finanzas Aplicadas. La certificación EFPA Esg Advisor se caracteriza por tener reconocimiento a nivel europeo, es decir, es el mismo programa a nivel europeo, y luego por estar muy enfocado al asesor y al planificador financiero. Los cursos tienen una duración de 30 horas y una vez superado y realizado el curso se pueden presentar al examen, que son 30 preguntas tipo test, tienen que realizar el 70% correctamente y además cada año han de realizar 8 horas de formación continua. Todos sabemos que en el sector...
temas de regulación es muy cambiante.
Exacto.
Hay que estar al día.
Hay que estar al día, es muy cambiante y yo creo que con esta formación continua sí se mantiene...
Es increíble que ya lo han hecho pues muchísimos advisors, ¿no? Me parece increíble porque casi no habéis hecho publicidad.
Hay que contar que en EFPA España contamos ya con 35.000 miembros certificados.
Impresionante, impresionante. Pues nada, y una pregunta que a mí me interesa mucho, ¿qué capacidades obtiene el banquero? Es decir, el banquero, ¿por qué se va a meter en tener otro certificado sobre sostenibilidad que le va a costar 30 horas y que además tiene pues eso, 8 horas de formación, que ahí, bueno, pues hacemos cosas en conjunto con EFPA nosotros para poder formar en esas 8 horas. Pero, ¿qué capacidades se quedan? ¿Por qué será un banquero, un asesor mejor el que tenga este certificado que el que no lo tenga?
Bueno, el asesor y el planificador financiero adquieren conocimientos transversales en materia de sostenibilidad, de medio ambiente, sociales y éticos y en su incidencia en los mercados financieros, con el objetivo de que puedan realizar mejores recomendaciones de inversión a sus clientes en materia sostenible y ajustándose, por supuesto, a los perfiles de riesgo de sus clientes.
Pues interesantísimo. Yo solo puedo decir desde aquí que os animo a todos a que pues, os certifiquéis, que aprendáis más sobre sostenibilidad, y es que las reglas del juego están cambiando. Un ejemplo tangible pues, es como la Comisión Europea acaba de lanzar el famoso reglamento SFDR, que pone efectivamente cuáles son las claves y las reglas del juego de la inversión sostenible encima de la mesa, y hay que conocerlas. Bueno, pues tenéis certificaciones como las que hace EFPA, y luego Robeco, comentaros que también tenemos nuestros módulos Essentials que están en la página web de Robeco, son gratuitos, están avalados por EFPA como horas de formación, 2 horas de formación cada módulo, y el último que acabamos de lanzar trata sobre los objetivos de desarrollo sostenibles. Os animo a que os forméis. Y bueno, no quiero dilatar más esta entrevista. Muchas gracias, Andrea.
Muchas gracias, Sonia.
Paso la palabra a mi compañero Javier García de Vinuesa, que es el responsable de distribución para Robeco a nivel global. Muchas gracias.
La siguiente parada que vamos a hacer, que es lo que llamamos los Planetary Boundaries, ¿vale? Que eran como los límites planetarios. En 2009, de la mano de una serie de científicos y sobre todo en el Centro de Resiliencia de Estocolmo, junto con unos premios Nobel, un grupo de científicos se reunieron allí para ver cuáles son los sistemas que realmente sostienen la vida, ¿no? El planeta. Y no solo fueron capaces de identificarlos, sino de también entender cómo funcionaban, cómo se correlacionaban, cuáles eran sus límites, cuáles eran sus distancias. Y las conclusiones fueron muy mixtas. Unas fueron positivas, otras no tanto. Pero desde luego a mí 3 me llamaban la atención. 3 de ellas, desde luego, ya han pasado todos los límites. Lo que es la concentración de CO2, la fijación de hidrógeno y la pérdida de biodiversidad. Para hablar de todo esto, encontramos con una persona absolutamente excepcional, con un currículum que desde luego no es apto para los que tengan alguna duda de autoestima profesional, porque el currículum es de quedarte bizco. Es Beatrice Crona, miembro del Centro de Resiliencia de Estocolmo, profesor de Sustainable Science, especializada en sistemas alimentarios, uno de los líderes de Patterns del Antropoceno de Estocolmo, líder del programa de investigación de Global Economy, y voy por la mitad, lo voy a dejar ahí. También me acompaña Lucen Pepelembos, que es nuestro responsable de cambio climático en Robeco, anteriormente también la responsable de cambio climático en uno de los mayores fondos de pensiones del mundo, de APG, además del director de investigación e innovación sostenible en el IDH, asesor del Key Royal Institute, etc. Y todo ello, bueno, pues vamos a tener un coloquio que va a dirigir nuestros compañeros de expansión, Roberto Casado, corresponsal económico y además redactor jefe. Así que, por favor, si nos acompañáis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Javier, for your kind introduction, and thank you to Robeco for organizing this event. Thank you to all the audience here in this amazing stage. And of course, thank you to those that are following us online. From a financial news perspective, it's a perfect timing for this event. Everybody's talking about ESG, sustainability, climate change. It's interesting because investors used to be accused of being too short-term focused or having geographical bias, just looking at their own region, being more comfortable. And now it seems investors are taking decisions with a much more global and long-term perspective. So it's perfect timing and also perfect location because we are going to talk about global issues and even universal issues that we'll see in the next hour or so. I'm conscious of time. I think Javier made the introductions. I think here on the stage we have Lucian Pepelembos. climate strategies at Robeco. And if technology is working, we have Beatrice Crona from Sweden, I think, from the Stockholm Resilience Center. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. To frame the discussion about these planetary boundaries, could you define to us what we are talking about when we talk about planetary boundaries?
Sure. I mean, the planetary boundaries is a way to define a safe operating space, you could say, for humanity on this planet. And they essentially help us illustrate that for a number of what we call key Earth system processes, those are processes that determine how the planet operates. A number of these have limits, which if we transgress them, they can severely impact the livability of the planet for humans as we know it. And we all know about climate, but we also heard Javier talk about biodiversity. And we're in the midst of a mass extinction now that we haven't witnessed since effectively the dinosaurs died out. And so losing this biodiversity means that we also lose that which underpins the well-functioning ecosystems we depend on, because they support our food production, countless other economic sectors. I think that tries to summarize it.
Yeah. And are we pushing too hard against these limits? Is at risk our way of life, our civilization, or we still have time to act?
That was not part of my questions, but yes, I think we still have time. I think the key, though, is to to not think about it as a single issue. So I don't know if you want me to get into that now.
Okay, thank you. And Lucian, this stretch we are taking with the planetary boundaries is a risk for financial markets. We all should invest in spaceships, space tourism, etc. Or how it's impacting the markets and investors?
Well, all of this is critical for financial markets, because ultimately our wealth and our well-being depend on nature. Our economy, our society is embedded in the biosphere. And for us as urban citizens, maybe our daily experience is quite technological, like it is here, but all of this is built on minerals, energy, cooling water, all sorts of ecosystem services. And research indicates that over half of global GDP is directly and critically dependent on ecosystems. Now, if these get damaged or declined or collapse, that can directly affect those economic activities, which poses economic and financial risks. Now, as a Robeco, we did an assessment of our portfolios, and we found out that 1/4 of our portfolio has dependencies, critical dependencies on these nature ecosystems, and 1/3 of our portfolio has strong impacts on ecosystem services. And these pose risks, because if these activities have impact on ecosystem services, it means that they may be subject, sooner or later, to regulation or technology change, etc. So ecosystems, biodiversity, nature, it is material to investors. We see it in our portfolio. So it is our responsibility, our fiduciary duty to tackle it.
Beatrice, how do you see the role of investors? Can they take the lead? Because we see politicians still arguing about this and etc. You think investors can be in the forefront of this fight?
Yeah, I think you can, and I think you should, and that you have to as well. And as Lucian was saying, I think until very recently, and still to some degree, the risks within the financial sector has been this concept centered entirely on financially material risk to companies that you invest in, and therefore to you as investors. But I think if we not acknowledge this predicament that we now face as humans living on this planet that may become less and less pleasant to live on, then you have to look at the drivers that are causing it. And it is to a large extent economic activities, corporate practices that do not account for negative externalities of their operations. So if these negative externalities, some of them are soon going to start to become directly financially material to companies themselves. And just a very simple example would be company practices that reduce groundwater tables, therefore reducing their own access to water, for example, or deforestation that is linked to agricultural production, which is affecting rainfall in that same region and therefore undermining the agriculture in the coming decades. But we're also going to be seeing more systemic risks. And I know everyone loves to cite COVID, but it is a good example of systemic risk. And it actually stems from deforestation and land use for intensified crop and livestock production, where we're pushing wildlife closer in contact to humans, and they're creating these conditions where you can get the emergence of new infectious diseases where they jump hosts. And there are countless examples of those kinds of systemic risks. Lucian mentioned, you're going to start to see cascading collapse of ecosystems as a result of us undermining the biodiversity and also putting climate change on top of that. And I think these systemic risks, they're going to start to hit companies and investors alike at scale. And so if we don't account for this aggravation of environmental unsustainability, if you're not doing that as an investor, you're setting yourself up for this systemic risk down the line. But it can be dealt with. This aggravation risk can really be dealt with, because as investors, the way that I see it, you have the power to condition the capital that you provide, whether it's covenants for fixed income or selection criteria for the companies that you include in your portfolios. Bringing in scientifically grounded sustainability criteria has the capacity to make a huge difference of scale and the speed that actually matters in this critical decade that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with Beatrice that investors have an important role to play on all this? Yeah?
Absolutely, and I think it has two sides to it, and we call this double materiality. So nature loss, as I said before, it can impact the value of our investments, but also our investments can contribute to nature loss. It can have an impact on nature loss. And this notion of double materiality is already reflected in legislation and in standards that we are working with. I think most of us, we are familiar with the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation from the European Union. It requires investors to disclose the adverse impacts of their investments on society and on the environment. Also, for example, the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, 5 years ago, when they first issued their framework, it was really focused on the risks of climate change for investments. But in their latest guidance, which was issued in October, it is also, in addition to that, how investors should contribute to climate mitigation, how investors should align their portfolios with Paris. So this notion of double materiality is there in the standards that we need to work with. The challenge, though, is the data. We have data at sector level, and I shared some of our insights, but we need data at issuer level, and that's really challenging. Any singular company faces biodiversity dependencies and impacts at multiple levels and in multiple places in the world. Like an apparel company, it buys cotton, which consumes water, there's agrochemicals involved. Then in the processing of the textiles, there can be pollution, again water consumption, and then in the disposal of the textiles, there's landfills, there's effects on habitat. Now, how do you add that up for a single company, and how do you aggregate that in a portfolio? That's really our focus of the work that we do. We partner with academics, with peers, with standard setters to have that data available, because we need steering relevant metrics and targets to be able to address this as investors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Beatrice, we don't want people to stay awake at night. So we talk about risk, but there are also opportunities from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, of course. And Vaclav made sure we are real with the risks and the challenges that we are facing. I think it's nice that Lucian mentioned this, because I think it is a big opportunity that we have by simply using data in a better way and having this close collaboration between academia, the cutting edge science, and the financial sector to really see how can we measure what can be measured to the best possible degree. That is a big opportunity. I was also asked to maybe reflect specifically on sustainable investment as an opportunity to invest in a resilient planet. And of course it is. David Attenborough talked about the wonderful recovery during the COP week. And I agree, this is what I hope investments can contribute towards. And I wanted to just make one reference back to the planetary boundaries here, which we kind of skipped over, namely that we need to address this, a huge opportunity here of not addressing these as single issues, but as connected ones. And when we look at climate, we have to also consider land use change and biodiversity, because they are connected in that it is the ecosystems and the biodiversity that uphold them that are able to, suck up the carbon and store it. So that's what's going to help us also. It's not just about reducing the emissions. But I also wanted to just say that it's not just about, it is opportunities, but I think it's important that if we frame investments in sustainability only as an opportunity, it invariably kind of suggests that this is something of an option. And as we know, it's not. I think that message is becoming clear. It's a must to avoid the worst of the risks. But if we do want to talk about this language of opportunities, then I'd say that a real opportunity lies in transforming how we as a society partly, do business, what and how much we consume. And to do that, we have to be prepared to challenge norms and to invest and be part of creating that new system. I think once we transition, and we heard Václav saying it might take a time, but once we transition and make a shift to, say, a carbon neutral or low carbon society, then conventional investment opportunities are going to start to materialize. But if everyone sits on the fence and waits for that transition to happen, it isn't going to happen fast enough. And we are at the cusp right now. And we heard Václav talk about there are a lot of technologies out there, but they're just not available at the scale needed. And we need powerful and bold investors who can nudge that system, the system we see now, over a threshold to create a critical mass of alternative, both business models, but also sustainable alternative solutions. And I think sitting back and waiting for others to help make that transition quickly and then stepping in to try and find investment opportunities, if I'm going to be provocative now, I would say that's a passive strategy. And I think as sustainable-minded investors or responsible investors, you should be part of the movement. So I guess to me, really, the transformative opportunity lies in not just being a passive player in this landscape, but to take active steps to invest in innovative businesses, models, whatever that might be, and be progressive shapers of future business opportunities and seize the chance to, financial biosphere stewardship is what I call it.
Look, investors always see opportunities when there are risks. Is this the case also? Or this is more you need more to take a defensive strategy or avoid the traps or the worst performance in terms of ESG? Or you think there are also opportunities to put the capital at work and good returns, etc.?
Absolutely. Indeed, for investors, risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. And that also goes here. And at Robeco, we like to say, in relation to climate change, that the biggest risk is not taking the opportunities. And that also goes for nature. The biggest risk is not acting. The biggest risk is not investing in those opportunities, because those opportunities, they are about regenerative agriculture, it's about renewable energy, circular economy, and those opportunities are helping to mitigate climate change and to reverse nature loss. So we need to address those opportunities. And the numbers are flabbergasting. Research shows that 2% of global GDP is required as additional investments to transition to a low-carbon circular economy. Only for energy, the investments already need to go up from 1 trillion a year to 4 trillion a year by 2030. So huge opportunity. But also, we shouldn't be naive. As Beatrice shares with us and Professor Václav, this transition will deeply question the lifestyles that we have, the consumption patterns that we have. And though I'm really an optimist, and I think this is all about a bright future, the transition itself will be painful because it's costly. It will have an influence on inflation, on growth, on public finance. We already see a little bit of that in the current markets, the commodity prices going up. But even in that painful transition, there are opportunities. The most pollutive, the most carbon-intensive sectors are the ones that need to bring us to a net zero society. They are the ones that require most capital, so we as investors should be with those companies, not go away from them, be closer to them, monitor them strictly, accelerate and invest in their transition, engage with them, but engage with teeth. And all of that are opportunities for us as investors.
We're running short of time, but Beatrice, what final message? Where do you see the planet in 10 years?
I don't know. The planet changes slowly still, even though the climate is changing kind of fast. But I guess my final message is it's urgent. And I think right now we have a moment in history and it's unprecedented. And the world and our kids and our grandkids, they need us to be bold and then to be creative. And I think to push the boundaries of what the mandate of our individual professions can do to achieve sustainability. And I think we didn't necessarily cause the problems, but our generation has the opportunity and the responsibility to do whatever we can to help avert the worst. And I think 10 years from now, when the window to hopefully reduce the risk of exceeding 2 degrees and depleting ecosystem, when that's closed a little bit more, we want to ask ourselves, where were we? Did we sit back and hope for someone to, take the lead? Or can you say that, no, you were part of that. You were courageous. You stepped up to the challenge. You did what you could to not just minimize impact by divesting from the worst, but you actively looked for these various ways to be part of the transformation. And I think because the time is now, the social license to operate, I think for all of us, for me as a scientist and for you as investors, it will be increasingly dependent on our ability to show that we actually did something now when it mattered.
And Luke, a final message, are you optimistic? Or you think it's too late to change how things are going?
No, it's not too late to change. We know from science that the impacts of climate change, the impacts of biodiversity decline will continue. It's inevitable that our planet reaches 1.5 degrees, but it's not too late to act, certainly not. And when it's 2030, I think all of us should be able to talk to our children or our grandchildren and say, hey, back in 2021, we were aware of these issues and we became part of the solution. And that means for all of us that we need to live up to that challenge. For us, there are data challenges. There's dependencies that we need to accept because we cannot act alone. We need to do this together, but we need to embrace that uncertainty. So we have no other option. It is time to act, and let's take that journey together.
Thank you. With this message of hope, I'd like to thank Beatrice and Lucian for being here. And hand over to Javier. Many thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Bueno, pues vamos a pasar al siguiente breve coloquio y como introducción, como algunos de vosotros sabréis, el jefe de estrategia electoral de Clinton, Carville, fue aquel que decía lo de "Is the economy stupid?", ¿no? Pero fueron luego los británicos los que lo aplicaron de una forma quizás mucho más tajante. Y cuando quisieron ver cuáles eran todas las consecuencias económicas del cambio climático, efectivamente no se lo preguntaron a ningún climatólogo, sino que se lo preguntaron a Nicholas Stern, que fue un research que se hizo de muchísima notoriedad, que de hecho ahora en Glasgow ha sido muy mencionado. Y una de las conclusiones era cómo efectivamente quizás si quería, como que el Reino Unido iba a tener que gastar al menos un 1% del PIB para evitar pérdidas de más del 5% inicialmente que podrían seguir hasta el 20%. Queríamos ahora pensar más que en problemas, pensar en soluciones ver ante realidades cambiantes, tirar un poco de conocimiento y tirar de historia. Y en nuestra industria, bueno, pues ver qué soluciones hay y hacerlo con personas que tienen esa experiencia, ese conocimiento y además se importan por el planeta. Tengo el placer de, bueno, os voy a introducir a Ana Claver, que por supuesto la conocéis todos, compañera mía desde hace 15 años, pero bueno, sobre todo directora general de España, Latinoamérica y del US Offshore. Por favor, Ana Claver. Y Gilbert Van Hassel, que es nuestro CEO, ha tenido puestos relevantes en JP Morgan, ha sido director de renta fija o CIO de renta fija en JP Morgan, director de tecnología global, CEO de ING y es actualmente el CEO de Robeco. Muchísimas gracias a los dos por participar y todo tuyo, ¿vale? Gracias.
Thank you, Anna and Gilbert, for being here. This discussion is about solutions, so I hope we'll find some solutions to this impressive problem. Gilbert, we saw in Glasgow, and Professor Smil also talked about the difference across regions, how to approach this problem of climate change. Europe is taking the lead in this issue with aggressive targets to reduce emissions, but some people could see this as a drag for economic growth. People are talking about degrowth as the solution for reducing emissions. How do you see this impacting the European economy and your business as a firm investing in European assets?
Well, actually, before answering that question, I was kind of reflecting of what I heard so far, and you know, it's actually quite a sobering a message by Professor Smil. But you know, I would just suggest read his book and maybe then also look at the latest Bill Gates book that talks about how to avoid climate disaster. And Bill Gates is a big fan of Smil, but he projects a completely different view. And I don't want to actually take all of the oxygen out of the room and get to a very negative view on the world. There is also a different view, and hope that we can solve this. As to your question, I mean, is decarbonization a competitive advantage for certain regions? Yes, I do think it is. Clearly, Europe is very committed to decarbonize by 2050. We have heard that China, who is the biggest polluter these days, is 10 years later, 2060. And India also is 2070. And if you look at Europe, and they're going to have a carbon adjustment mechanism, and you know, it's not clear yet whether they will impose that or not, but the idea behind that there is that if you look today, the carbon price per ton varies somewhere between 25 cents and $130, and Europe is around 70, 80. And the idea would be that everything that comes into the European Union will be taxed at the difference between the origin carbon price and the price of the European Union. And that would give a clear example. Also, you know, socioeconomic, you know, you will see that people will start more and more to favor products that come out of regions that are carbon neutral. And you will also see that carbon neutrality will stimulate an immense wave of innovation. I mean, to give you an idea, and it's probably a fact not well known, but at this very moment in the United States, they employ already 5 times more people in renewable energy than they do in fossil fuel. So there is hope there. And as far as asset management is concerned, clearly the role of asset manager in the finance industry in general is pretty straightforward. It's to provide and to allocate capital. And it is our duty to make sure that we allocate capital to those companies that actually are going to get here in terms of carbon neutrality. And also that we engage with those that are the biggest polluter and help them on their pathway to get to carbon neutrality. So I think, yes, I mean, there's going to be many opportunities, and I think that Europe is very well positioned.
Mm-hmm. And Anna, in Spain, Spain has been one of the countries with much more development of all the renewable sources. But I don't know if your industry, ESG, climate investment, has been also taken by clients, investor, or it's a slow process? And how is now the ESG industry in Spain?
I think the Spanish industry has changed rapidly during the last years. There has been three main developments. The first one is a shift from ESG integration into impact. I remember 10 years ago when Robeco started to integrate ESG in all of the investment processes, nobody in the Spanish industry was familiar with the concept, you know. Nowadays, the emphasis was both in the material, financial information. Nowadays, the emphasis is more on impact, as the invested companies have an effect and are affected by sustainable development. So that shift, it has been one of the main developments. The second, I will say that in this new environment, the PMs, analysts, the investment industry needs to adapt and to re-educate themselves in these new subjects, such as climate change, human rights. At Robeco, we are used to deal with this complexity. We have just created cross-functional teams to be supported by specialist experts. As a CFA also, that I'm the chair of the Sustainable Committee, we have also perceived a lot of interest in education by professionals, business schools, universities. That's why, for example, CFA has recently launched ESG certificate. They are working in climate change. But it's very interesting to see the lack of knowledge from the leading business schools in this new material. They are asking support to CFA and to Robeco and to other leaders in this material to be able to prepare courses for the students. And lastly, the game changer has been the EU Finance Action Plan. The aim of the plan was to reorientate capital to the sustainable companies and also to provide transparency and long-term horizon to the investment industry. And additionally, the new reporting disclosure for corporates will increase the ESG data quality that will allow us to make better informed investment decisions. So those will be, I think, the three main developments in the last years that I've seen in the Spanish industry.
And Gilbert, we were talking before about opportunities for investors. There's a bit of a discussion. I was wondering, where do you see the biggest opportunity? Investing in companies that are already clean, ESG compliant, etc., or is the big opportunity is helping companies that are doing the transition towards those goals? I mean, where do you see the best opportunities?
Well, I mean, let's step back a little bit further. I think, you first need to start. The biggest opportunity and the biggest threat is that we really have to save the planet. We are in a situation that is identified as being code red. And we are actually the only living species that is capable of destroying itself. And we're doing a fantastic job at it. And as Lucian already mentioned, to actually get to net zero, if we do start today, it's going to cost about an additional 2% of GDP per annum. And that, if we wait and let's say until 2050 to do that, we will be closer to 20%. I mean, research shows somewhere between 18 and 20%. So the first opportunity and first risk is basically to make sure, that this doesn't happen. And then if you look at what are the areas and where are the biggest opportunities to invest in, I think there are three, and they've already been mentioned. I mean, first is clearly, decarbonization. And everything that is basically related to that, and so investing in renewable energy is key, and investing in hydrogen, investing in wind, investing in solar. That is number one. Number two is clearly electrifying transportation and electrifying industry. And there we think of electrical vehicles for sure, battery development, storage of energy, which needs to increase. And the third one is that our consumption and production patterns need to become much more efficient. And there, circular economy is clearly important, looking on how we reuse, repair, repurpose things rather than having this unbridled production and consumption going on. And if you look at all of these, and the kind of research estimates are that if we invest in only these three areas, we would see that by 2050 it would create an additional wealth of around 4.5 trillion euros. And if you would invest in those three heavily, by 2030, about 50% of carbon would be eliminated. So lots of opportunities.
Yeah. Anna, when people talk about ESG, everybody think about the E for environment and not too much about social, for instance, because maybe it's more difficult to measure. How do you see the impact of all this investment in more on the social side of the economies and countries? Yeah.
I think first of all, unfortunately we have seen some setbacks recently in national commitments to net zero, because we know that the world is supposed to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 in order to meet the Paris Agreement. However, it's currently only in 0.5%. So there is so much room to improve. And I think here also politicians have a major role here. We have seen in the US, President Biden having problems passing his clean energy bill through Congress due to the objections from a senator from a state that produce a lot of carbon and whose support is imperative. Saudi Arabia, one of the largest world's emitters, has postponed also that commitment to meet net zero to 2060 due to its reliance in oil. COP26, so many politicians there, so many plans that we need to see the execution. We have to translate all those plans into action. So in that part, in the economic, in the politician part, I think there is so much work to do. And do not forget that if we want to become carbon neutrality, we need to preserve the natural carbon sinks, such as forest. And sadly, the continuous destruction of the Amazon, I think Václav Smil was mentioning also, show us how far we are to meet that target. But I think you have just mentioned a very important issue, which is the social part of this transition. And I think that's something that we really need to take into account, because it is believed that the human power is going to be decisive in shaping future climate policies. Consumers are increasingly refusing environmentally damaging products, such as single-use plastic bottle, and they are searching also for new alternatives in transportation, such as electric cars. And we have seen in many countries, for example, in the Western democracies, a race in demonstration against a highly polluting policies, companies, along with a race in parliamentary representation by green parties. This is the case of Germany. Then you have emerging markets, such as India, that they are really suffering social unrest due to the displacing of millions of people that have to go due to the extreme climate conditions. And then you have the non-democratic countries, such as China, that they need to keep selling their products without damaging the environment, because otherwise no one in the Western countries will buy those products. So in the end, all this human power will be completely key in this transition. And do not forget that we have to go to a just transition. That importance is recognized by Paris Agreement. This transition to low carbon has to rise prosperity, has to be a key driver for job creations. And in the meantime, of course, there will be challenges for professionals, for countries, for sectors, for corporations. But I think, as an investors, we have to try to have that positive environmental and social impact. So at the same time that we are identifying an opportunity or a climate investment opportunity, we cannot forget the social responsibilities behind that, the social exclusion, the human rights, the inequality, and so on. So that just transition, that social aspect, I think is very important to take into account in this transition.
Coming back to the E of ESG, Gilbert, you have a net zero pledge. How are you going to get to that target internally and especially outside in your assets, your companies, you have investments? How are you going to influence on them to become net zero?
Yes, well, we announced about a week before COP26 in Glasgow our path towards net zero. And we committed that, that by 25 we would be around 30% less, and by 2030 about 50% less carbon in our portfolios. And there are a number of ways. There's about 4 actions that we will take to get there. I mean, the first thing is, and this is the crucial question to ask when an asset manager tells you that they're going to go to net zero, is on which assets? Because clearly our business is a combination of many different vehicles. And the assets that we really ourselves 100% control are the funds. Because we have, and that's about 40% of our asset base. The other 60% is basically mandates where our clients specifically instruct us to invest in certain products with certain criteria related to us. So when we talk about our net zero commitment, of course we want to talk about the entire portfolio, but what we can immediately influence is that 40%. And there we will, over the next number of years, just like the ratchet mechanism that you have in the EU, reduce in portfolios the carbon by about 7% per annum. The second thing, and on all of those that will receive mandates, we will engage with these clients. We will very much discuss with them pathways to reduce it in their portfolios. And society will help us in that respect, because more and more fiduciary responsibility is no longer only defined by maximizing wealth, but also by maximizing well-being. And the old capitalism of Milton Friedman, where you basically you maximize return of shareholders, is slowly but surely being replaced by stakeholders capitalism, where you not only maximize the return from the shareholder, but you maximize the return for all of society and all of the audiences you work with as an organization. The third aspect is clearly voting and engagement. And there we will very actively contact the 200 biggest emitters in the world. And we will start by sending CEO letters to all of them and see how they reply. There's about 55 companies. Those 200 basically emit about 40% of total green gas emissions. Then there are the next 55, and that's about 20%. We will have very, very active engagement. And there are about 15 of those today that we call in code red, where, if we don't see a pathway and we don't see immediate progress, they risk in the next 2 years to come on our exclusion list. So voting and engagement is very, very important in that pathway. And then the last and fourth dimension is what can we do ourselves as a company? And you know, you have to think about things like, you know, we already are operating in Rotterdam, where we have 85% of our people based in one of the most ecological building that we have. Heating is geothermic, the cooling too. We use rainwaters for various uses in our building. We have smart lighting systems that basically react on movement everywhere in the organization. We have loading stations in our parking garages for all of the cars. You know, we're going to reduce our travel budget by 7% per year, and are going to, just like today, you know, have these events in person for a limited number of people, but then of course a lot more in teams. We are, as of the beginning of next year, change our entire car park into electrical cars, so there will be no new cars that people can get from the company unless they are electrical. So there's many things that are happening. So it's the portfolio where we can do it on the funds. It's working with the discretionary mandates. It's voting and engagement, and lastly, it's what we can do as an organization.
Yeah, and Anna, how you integrate this ESG criteria in your investment decisions? In the old days, I guess everything was about price, risk, return. How you integrate now ESG? Sometimes there could be discrepancies. I don't know. How is ESG integrating in your portfolios?
I think, first of all, I mean, you have to take that ESG, that extra financial information, and then you included that in all the evaluation processes. And that's something that we must continue to keep doing. I mean, to integrate ESG in our investment decisions processes. Because we might focus first on the E. I think the E part is going to be very important due to regulators, due to also this climate change and these net zero targets that we have in front of us. And we have to include also, and that's something that is evolving, but we have to include those new climate metrics, such as the environmental or the climate value at risk. So that's something that our portfolios and our PMs are currently working with those metrics, and also doing two kinds of reporting. This is the financial reporting, also the climate targets and reporting, and in the short future, we will have also those by the diversity targets. So that's something that is very important to take also into account, because it has been demonstrated that the sustainable companies try to do better. I mean, we are able to create that alpha, that outperformance for our investors if you compare the sustainable companies versus the unsustainable laggards. So I think that's something that we will try to incorporate, and also the forward-looking data. I think that's something very important to take into account. Up until now, we had backward-looking data, and that's good, but this is just the past emissions from the companies. So some of them, they can be out of your scope, out of your investment universe just because of the past, without taking into account the transition plans that those companies might have in the future. So really taking into account that forward-looking data is when you are able to have those game changers, and that's, we think, very, very important. Also, as Gilbert was mentioning, ESG integration approach or the solutions, we will have to take into account the engagement. Engagement is increasing in importance, because it's very important to be able to influence the companies you are investing, you are working with. Otherwise, you sell those companies, other investors with less scruples will get in, and you as an investor, you wouldn't have solved anything. So I think, Robeco, we want to be part of the transition. We really want to engage with those companies. And lastly, I think related to that ESG integration or the approach in ESG solution, we have seen, and that's something that is increasing also, all the solutions that try to have a social or an environmental impact, that are targeting the circular economy, water scarcity, electrification, SDGs. So that's something where the investors can make a difference. And we see that there's, the interest is there, and we will have to increase working in that path. Recently, Robeco has launched bespoke climate bond solutions to allow our clients to decarbonize their portfolios for 2050. So those are the ways in which we integrate, we take into account ESG in our investment decision process, and looking forward, the importance of taking that into account.
I think we're running out of time, but a final question for Gilbert. Greenwashing. Everybody, all funds are saying, oh, we are green, we are ESG compliant. Companies, all of them are also saying we have great ratings. How to avoid greenwashing, how clients can differentiate who is a real ESG compliant and who is not?
Well, it's a big issue, and we have seen recently a number of cases where regulators intervened for potential greenwashing incidents. I think that there's a couple of things that will help. I mean, first of all, you need to take it ESG and ESG integration. You need to take it very seriously. And you need to have it in 100% of your assets as an organization. We are doing that within Robeco, identifying what material ESG factors are by industry, and looking then at the opportunity and the risk. Secondly, as an organization, you need to be committed from the top down. The entire organization needs to be committed. Thirdly, when you look at your portfolios and you as clients, when you look at asset managers, do the research. Make sure that you just don't take face value what is being said in prospectuses and so on, but do the research on your asset manager. Ask the right questions. Thirdly, I think that legislations like SFDR are going to make a real difference. We will have a common taxonomy. We will have common risk factors. We will be very clear on what the adverse indicators are. We will be clear on what an Article 6 and 8 and a 9 is, although right now everybody has basically met the March deadline, but I would suspect that for many asset managers, all of these concepts will be a little bit different. An 8 with one asset manager won't be an 8 with another one, and so on. But that over time will regulate itself. And then lastly, we all are regulated companies, and I think that. Until now, MiFID has been at the attention of the regulators, but I think, our compliance departments are going to work very hard in the next couple of years to make sure that we meet SFDR regulation. But clearly it is an issue, but I don't think that the industry intentionally makes it an issue, and that over time things are going to get much better.
Okay, thank you. We don't have time for more. I think, as we said, there are big problems, but also some potential solutions. So thank you, Ana. Thank you, Gilbert, and hand over to Javier. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Bueno, hemos hablado un montón. Muchísimas gracias a los dos. Hemos hablado de cuáles son los problemas, de algunas soluciones. Hemos estado con el profesor Smith, hemos estado con Beatrice, el centro de Estocolmo. En fin, yo creo que hemos hablado de casi todo, desde un punto de vista más académico, desde un punto de vista de Robeco, y cuando lo comentaba con Sonia digo, bueno, pues yo creo que ya, y me dice Javier, es que ni de broma, dice, porque esto o lo vives o no te lo crees, Y digo, bueno, pero ¿qué podemos hacer? Y entonces me empezó a hablar de lo que se llama el overview effect, que me pareció interesantísimo. Y le digo, bueno, pues cuéntame, Sonia. Y me dice, pues mira, Javier, es una sensación muy cognitiva, muy transformadora, muy emocional, que sienten muchas de las personas que han ido al espacio y que es difícil de transmitir, pero bueno, pues yo creo que lo que cuentan es que ayuda a diluir el conflicto cuando lo ves desde arriba, relativizas las fronteras, los problemas, tienes un sentimiento más constructivo. Bueno, yo no me atrevo a hablar de ello porque no he estado en el espacio, pero Sonia de nuevo ha conseguido traer a André Kuipers, es astronauta, es físico, es holandés, ha estado 2 veces en el espacio, la primera vez con la misión Delta en 2004, la última en 2011, estuvo 6 meses. Y todo tuyo, me encantaría saber cómo es esta experiencia. André, the floor is yours, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
An empty stage, empty space. What has spaceflight to do with a sustainable planet? How can we help? It's time to act. We mentioned that already. And actually, if we talk about spaceflight, it was Soviet Union, United States. Who was the first? Who was the best? On the moon. 12 people walked on the moon. But much more important than all this technology and people going to the moon was Apollo 8. With Apollo 8 in 1968 was the first time that people went away from the Earth to the moon. And they saw something special. We see moonrise, they saw the Earth coming up. Iconic picture. All of a sudden, we could see through human eyes that we all live on this small oasis, very fragile in a hostile environment of space. We know that we live on a sphere, but if we look outside, the Earth is flat and the air is endless. And now we could see that this is all. This is everything we have. The term spaceship Earth was born. We are all astronauts on a spaceship with limited resources in a hostile environment of space. If you hear the voices of the astronauts, very interesting, that one says, look, beautiful, beautiful. And the other says, quick, take a camera. And then the commander says, yeah, but it's not in the script. Nobody was realizing that this was more important than the whole moon. Bill Anders, the astronaut who took this picture, he said, we went to the moon, but we discovered the Earth. Nowadays, we use spaceflight to watch our planet in all kinds of ways with the Earth observation satellites. In all kinds of ways, all kinds of wavelengths, much better than the human eye. We can look at our agriculture. You can find diseases in crops. It's for food security, where you start your rice fields in the Mekong Delta, for example. So you use that for agricultural purposes, but also deforestation. We have several satellites, and the satellites are compared, and over decades you can see the same piece of ground. So very important to see the differences. I can see it also with the naked eye, but it's just one moment. With satellites you see it over time. You use it. Robeco uses it. Satellite information is important to see if your projects are really working. You can analyze things, and you can see if you have your good investment in that. So satellite information, the data, scientific data, is very important to make your decisions. We can also see pollution. Pollution in the oceans, oil spills. So you can track the people who do that. And we have another problem, and that's difficult from space. Plastic, the famous plastic soup. A lot of plastic is getting into the oceans. Soon we will have more plastic than fish in the oceans. That's a serious problem in all kinds of ways. Of course, animals get stuck in it. Turtles, dolphins, they drown in the ocean, but they also eat it. A plastic bag and a jellyfish look very much the same. And nowadays, you already find lots of whales. This is in Norway, something like 20 kilos of plastic in its stomach. And not only, it's not one whale that's crazy and eats plastic. No, it's happening everywhere. This is in a plastic bag in a whale in the Philippines, at 29 kilos. This is in Thailand. This is in Taiwan. So everywhere on the planet, Scotland, and also this is in Spain. A whale, 29 kilos of plastic in his stomach. Serious problem. Can we solve it? We can try to get it out, but it's difficult to find. Big parts, small parts, on the bottom, in the middle, on the surface. So it's difficult to find, and we have all kinds of technologies to see how we can find big concentrations of plastic. And maybe we found something. Bacteria that are eating this plastic, they create a little oil layer, and the roughness of the surface is decreasing. So maybe with satellites we can find it to see where the big concentrations are and clean it up. So we try to use space flight to solve a lot of problems. And of course, climate change. Earth is warming up. We heard the first story, and this is the data where all this is based on. So climate is, the Earth is heating up. The atmosphere, the oceans. We get big periods of droughts in South Africa, 2017. You see how the water is disappearing, how deserts are increasing. Serious problems for a big part of the population. Also in this region, Sahara is getting up. Also for a country like Spain, getting big problems with all this heat and drought periods. And it has strange effects that you don't realize. In 2010, these are measurements of carbon monoxide, and in 2010 there were lots of fires in Russia and in China. I noticed, I flew through Moscow for training, space flight training, and there was smoke already in the plane. I didn't realize it was not nice for weeks in a smoky environment, but what happened is that the harvest failed. The grain harvest failed in Russia. They decided not to export the wheat and harvest to the Arabic world. Bread prices increases, Arab Spring started, and we're still in the middle of all these wars and refugee crisis. So it has a big effect on the whole world because of the heat and drying up. Now, the heat is even worse at the polar areas. Ice is melting. We have satellites that go around the poles, measuring the thickness of the ice, and it's disappearing. We will have summers without polar ice. It has a lot of effect on the flora and fauna, of course, but also on the economy. If you now have to go with your cargo from Shanghai to Rotterdam or Madrid or whatever, Madrid's a bit difficult inland, but to the harbor, a Spanish harbor, you go around the Cape or through the Suez Canal if it's not blocked. This is thousands of kilometers shorter. So you will see changes in the economy, changes in shipping routes. It has lots of effects if the sea ice is disappearing. Now the ice on the North Pole is already in the water. No sea level rise. But the ice on Greenland is kilometers thick land ice. And that's also melting. And there we will see things that we cannot predict properly yet. For example, changes in the ocean currents. We now have, of course, the Gulf Stream going from the Caribbean all the way, and you have ice-free harbors up to Murmansk. This might change if there's this cold water from the land ice getting into the oceans. You might see changes that we cannot really predict yet. So things happen. And then, of course, sea level rise. Serious problem. Big part of the population of this planet lives on the coast. And we see the sea level rise in all kinds of ways. This satellite, Sentinel-6, is measuring for the whole world the sea level rise. Not only sea level rise, also wave heights, roughness of the ocean. So in all kinds of ways we get different pictures of our planet, and it's not everywhere the same. Because of gravity effects of big ice masses or land masses, we have differences. But here we can see how the sea level rise is occurring over the whole planet. That's important for example, people who live on the coastline, a country like where I'm from, the Netherlands, half of it is below sea level. With this satellites, we can measure on millimeter level changes in ground movements. So, for example, dikes are being checked that way. So we have all these satellites to see the results of sea level rise, but also the dangers of that and what you have to do against it. And then, of course, air pollution. Well, we heard the nitrous dioxides already. Here we have nitrous dioxide measurements, and we see already the red areas on the planet where there's a lot of pollution going on. And Madrid is this red spot, for example. And, well, of course, this is the effect of all these people, all the cars, all the industry. You measure it from space. Things can go better as well as you take countermeasures. The hole in the ozone layer is slowly improving. So also important that you have scientific data to show that what you do against it, that it really helps. And then methane. You heard it already before, very strong greenhouse gas. Also that is rising over the years. has all kinds of different sources. We heard that also in the first speech. So you want to know where it's coming from and what you can do against it. Now, this was recently launched, Tropomi, on a European satellite, and that measures for the whole planet all the ingredients of these air pollution gases. Can be ozone, can be methane. It measures the carbon monoxide, the aerosols, nitrous dioxide, etc. All the ingredients from spaceflight, from air pollution is measured from space. And you can have different pictures of your planet, depending on what you look at and where the problems might be. So this is what you can see with the naked eye. You see here, the north of India, there's all this smoke here around New Delhi. And we heard already, they're still burning dung, they're still burning wood, incomplete fires. And here you can see what's in it. You can analyze it. The formaldehyde, for example, the carbon monoxide. These are incomplete fires, very, very bad for the health of the people who live there, of course. And more in detail. You can see, this is New Delhi. More and more in detail, we can measure where it's coming from. In the past, we had this kind of pixels, and now we have this kind of pixels. So that means if there is, for example, a leak in pipelines, gas pipelines, for example, you can measure where it's coming from and find that source and do something against it. And we also heard the ships, very polluting. The ships with all our consumables. Well, you can see them. This is here is Spain. Here's Morocco. Here you see little ships, but with this Tropomi, for example, you can measure how polluting these huge ships are. Individual ships you can measure. So this is the data that you can use for all this. By the way, lockdown has this effect. Here in China, before and after lockdown, and here in the north of Italy, for example. These are all European satellites, the Sentinels. It's the Copernicus program, the EU program. So ESA, the European Space Agency, is doing technology and the science, and EU is doing the applications in the Copernicus program. All this data goes to Frascati in Italy, and then it's analyzed, and everybody can use their data. And you can use it as an organization, as a government, to see for your objectives. So this Copernicus program is used for all these applications. So we watch our planet, we use spaceflight for that. Now, I was in another satellite, and that was the International Space Station. Big project since '98, things are being built, and it's very expensive spaceflight. I always like this cartoon. People say, oh, it's a waste of money to put in spaceflight, you better launch it straight away. It is expensive. It's 100 billion space station, but it's spread over 35, 40 years in the complete Northern Hemisphere. So I guess the average Spanish citizen pays €1 per year per citizen on the space station. So it's very limited, but very visible. You always have to explain why you do it, although everybody uses it. Navigation, communication satellites, weather satellites, all these Earth observation satellites, etc. This is what is spent, but it's not totally comparable. This is ESA, is the EU. The time is not totally comparable, but they have an impression of what is spent on spaceflight, and it's spread over science, it's spread over technology, human spaceflight, etc., etc. It's a beautiful space station, a beautiful example of cooperation. All kinds of countries that were fighting each other not so long ago are working now in the biggest technological project there is. Beautiful example of what we can do. As cooperation between states, between cultures. As big as a soccer field, 80 by 100 meters, content of a big aeroplane, 1,000 cubic meters, and is orbiting our planet at 400 kilometers altitude with a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. It's a speed that makes it difficult to get there and to get back. And of course, for our power, we have big solar panels. It's going around the planet in 1.5 hours. That means the planet is rotating under you. So every time you're at the same spot, the Earth has moved. So every time you see a new part, and these are the orbits of the space station. And if you're hanging here over Madrid, you can see from the middle of Morocco till the south of Scandinavia. Beautiful place, but we do there, well, not only looking out. It's not a holiday, so we're very busy. I had the pleasure and privileged to go there twice with the Soyuz rocket and spent then 204 days in space. It was fantastic. You go into orbit, fantastic to do all the science on board. We are weightless because we fall around the planet all the time, so this is where we go, why we go there, for the weightless conditions, to study things what have to do with weightless. Fluid physics, but also materials, combustion processes, all kind of things we study up there in the space station. You go there with different cargo ships, different human-rated ships like the Soyuz or the SpaceX now. Fantastic place. We do a lot of good work there in all the different experiments, technological stuff. We prepare for longer periods in the future to space, etc. But the interesting thing here is now the planet. Looking out of the window with your own eyes, getting also this overview effect. To see the planet as one, that you think this is it, this is everything we have. We have a cupola, a beautiful place with a lot of windows where we can look totally around you, you watch the planet. I show it like this because we're used that eyes are up and mouth is down, but in reality the thing is on the bottom of the space station. So we actually always look upside down to the Earth. And the cupola is a fantastic place, and we took something like half a million pictures because you keep on taking pictures all the time. Sometimes you come at the window and you think, where's the Earth? Well, then the Earth is above you. There is no up and down in space. It can be below you, it can be above you. Very thin atmosphere. You have the feeling if you blow very hard that you blow off the whole atmosphere. Very, very thin. And that everything, all life, is in a little layer of 10 kilometers water, 10 kilometers air. That's it. That's everything we have. It's a very thin layer around the third rock around the sun. Here we fly along a wall of water. You have the feeling that's a big wall. This is the Pacific. Here we see the Hawaiian Islands. This big island over here. And 70% of our planet is water and clouds. That might be boring, but also there are interesting things to see. For example, a hurricane. Hurricanes are getting stronger because the ocean heat is heating up, more energy in the hurricanes. So more extreme weather we can see. Also interesting things in the oceans that you don't expect. This is the Canary Islands, and here you see some shading of ocean currents beyond the islands. So interesting things in the oceans themselves. Very colorful, our planet. The most colorful place are the Bahamas. Here we have Florida, this is Cuba. Beautiful turquoise waters. It's a pleasure to look out. It's very nice to see that. But there is also a problem with all these coral reefs. Here, let's see. Yeah, here we have Venezuela, we can see here. And here you see the Great Barrier Reef, Australia. Now corals are under threat. Oceans are getting warmer. Corals don't like that. The sea level is rising, so less light. Corals don't like that. And the oceans are getting more acid because of the CO2. 3 factors why coral reefs are under threat. And it's 30% of our fish that's getting born there. It's a serious problem that we have with the coral reefs because of the heating up, that global warming. Here we have the Indonesian islands. And here we have Komodo, Flores. Here we see Sumbawa with volcanoes, so it's beautiful. I mean, our planet is fantastic to see. Huge stretches of water and also this kind of atolls. Now this is another problem with sea level rise. Populations on these islands have to move because sea level is rising. So now in Glasgow it was also mentioned, this is a big problem for a big part of the population, especially on these islands. They will go underwater. Serious problem for the population there. Here the Maldives. So that brings us to Sri Lanka and India. And let's go north of India, and here we see Tibet, India, Nepal, and the Himalaya chain. Mountains, very beautiful. Glaciers also. Glaciers are disappearing on the planet. Everywhere, glaciers are disappearing. Serious problem as well, because the melting water from the Himalayas getting into the Brahmaputra River here. 500 million people is depending on melting water. It's a storage, it's sweet water storage. If glaciers are gone, you get periods of drought where the rivers are empty, so you get extreme weather. You get flooding of the rivers, extreme weather, more hurricanes, etc. And on the other side, more dry periods if there's no more buffer in the glaciers. So we might see climate refugees because of sweet water problems over there. At the bottom, where the rivers get into the oceans, you have this kind of deltas. And not every country has good dikes to protect against sea level rise. In Bangladesh, for example, it might be a serious problem. Very beautiful place, Australia. Fantastic landscape, but also there we had huge fires, which happens in a lot of places on this planet. And you see how the smoke is going all the way on the Pacific. But this is in California, also there forest fires. You see it more and more, warm periods, hot periods. What was it, 50 degrees in Canada last year? Strange increases of temperatures. So lots of deserts on the planet. Deserts are beautiful. You see beautiful things. More and more deserts, more and more dry, more and more heat. Here you see how sandstorms go all the way on the Atlantic, here the Canary Islands again. And what you see, unfortunately, is that in the north of Africa, you will see the Horn of Africa here, you see, if you zoom in, you see these kind of things. These are not blood vessels. These are dried out riverbeds in Somalia, because the deserts are increasing, and also in North Africa. And there the population is growing the fastest on the planet. Not in Asia, in North of Africa. This is Lake Chad. Very important. 30 million people live around Lake Chad. Important water, food. This is Lake Chad 1973. This is Lake Chad now. So we get big problems drying up over time while the population is growing the fastest there. Not only there, here we see the Aral Lake going down. So human activity you can also see. For example, here in Saudi Arabia, all these dots, this is agriculture. They take hundreds of years old water from 1,000 meters deep, have circular irrigation, as long as it lasts until the water is gone. So human activity you can see very well on the planet. Mining in Siberia. Here we have salt winning in Australia. Pilot holes. Planes go through a cloud layer, you get crystallization. You see snow showers caused by planes. So planes you see all over the planet. Also, by the way, a greenhouse is a water vapor. It's CO2, methane, the nitrous oxides, but also water vapor is causing a greenhouse effect. Human activity in this shape. Architecture, here in Dubai, you can see that as well. And let's go to the other side. Here we see the coast of Argentina. This is Valdez. And here we have cities, Buenos Aires, Montevideo. But you also see smoke plumes. And that you see a lot. We heard already the deforestation. This is in Africa. With satellites, of course, you can analyze it. Carbon monoxide measurements here. Here we have the Amazon. You see that a lot with the naked eye. This is here measurements with the satellite. With the naked eye, you can see all these forest fires. And if the clouds are gone, a rainforest, lots of clouds, but if they're gone, you see these kind of structures. All this light green is cut away rainforest. So with the satellite, of course, you see it over time. You can measure it over time. This is a piece of the Amazon, and the next picture is the same piece 10 years later. Then you can see how fast it goes and realize and calculate. So here a period of 24 years, I think it is, in the Amazon, it's very thin soil because the rain will flush the soil away if there's no more roots. If you cut the forest, the soil will be flushed away quickly. And here you see it, here's a protected area, and here the forest is disappearing. This is in Suriname here, and you see there's a roads being dug, and along the roads, the forest disappears. So you can also see where the problems are, where it's going to. This is bad for biodiversity, the animals, the plants, but also for the human population, because they also lose their livelihood. You see a road is cut, and along the roads you see this forest change. and that leads to this kind of pictures. So the barren local population is in danger. They have to leave their areas as well. So it's bad for animals, plants, but also for humans. It's not only in the Amazon, of course. Here we see a sequence in Borneo. This was the most diverse place on the planet. And there you see also how the forest is disappearing there. So in my lifetime, the whole forest in Borneo will probably be gone. Serious issue. It leads to erosion. This is Madagascar. Most forests are gone already, and the rain just flushes the fertile soil away. Whole mountains disappearing in the ocean. It leads to drought. This is Sumatra. Here we see Malaysia. This is Kuala Lumpur, Singapore. Uncontrollable fires, causing a lot of pollution in Southeast Asia. Mostly illegal forest deforestation. Well, this we heard before, the Chinese cities. This is what you see with the naked eye, and with satellites you can measure the nitrous dioxide in there, for example. So satellites, very important to measure this, to get the scientific data. Now let's go to Europe. Here we have Spain, and here we have Turkey, Greece, Crete, and we fly here over the north of Italy. Here are the Alps, Spain, France. Here is Spain, Pyrenees here, Mallorca, Ibiza, Menorca. So very nice to fly over Europe. And at night, even better. The sun goes down, you get reflection on the water. Careful with your eyes. Here we see Cuba, beautiful reflection on the water there. The mouth of the Amazon here. I'll go a bit faster because I want to show you something else. You get a golden space station, fantastic at night because of the layers of the atmosphere. And then you get into the night part. Northern light, beautiful, to fly over it. Thunderstorms, lightning. So on one side it's beautiful to see all these things, but it's also a bit scary. All the lights you see, humans. We grow every day with 200,000 people. 200,000 people, it's a city every day, extra. Here we have Istanbul, Ankara, this is Athens. And here we fly over the Sahara. Nobody wants to live in the desert, everybody lives on the Nile. So here we have the cities on the Red Sea, there's Israel, Cyprus there. Here we have the Strait of Hormuz, so a lot of oil going through here. The Emirates have a lot of energy there. So here we see Dubai again. The coast of the United States, this is Washington. Here we have New York. And here, San Diego, Los Angeles, on the west coast, Phoenix. Cities in the United States look very different than, you see all the grids compared with India, for example. Bangalore is this. Borders. This is a clear border between India and Pakistan. So two countries that don't like each other so much, apparently. Here we have Seoul, South Korea. This is China. And in between this dark hole, that's North Korea. So you can see that here. But what you also see is all these fishing ships. This is Taiwan. You see all fishing ships, fishing ships, fishing. And then you start to realize that why fish stocks are going down on the planet. So this is the coast of Vietnam. All these are fishing boats. South China Sea, light blue dots, purple dots, green dots, the real colors. And then you understand this is a visualization of the problem in the oceans. And like with the forest, we don't give the earth time to recover. We empty the oceans, fish are getting smaller, they're fishing on new species, more and more away from the coast. And the planet has no time to recover. Forests, oceans, we are using it up. It's not only there. This is here you see also big fishing fleets. This is near the coast of Argentina. So it's on several places on this planet. Of course, I want to show Spain at night. Here we fly along the coast of Morocco. Here we have Portugal, and here is Spain with Madrid, of course, Barcelona over there. And if you look, let's see, look back, here's Madrid, Look to the south. So here we have Morocco. Here the boot of Italy. It's beautiful at night. It's very double. It's beautiful, but on the other side a bit scary. You see how highways get into the Alps. And here, so is over Western Europe. There's London, Paris. Fantastic, but very fragile planet. Spaceflight we use now to watch our planet. We continue as well. We will go back to the moon. In 5 years we will back to the moon. There is an International Space Station coming around the moon. So we will see people on the moon again. What for? Well, further research. We don't know so much about the moon yet. We want to go to the South Pole. There is water. We can use it as a fuel. It's preparation for Mars in the future. But we can also maybe use it, maybe it's still in the region of science fiction, use it for resources, for energy, but also for the rare earth metals, palladium, platinum, iridium, for our cell phones, for our LCD screens, for the batteries. Very hard to find on Earth. And we might use it in the future even for energy, in the form of a nuclear fusion. It's being built now in the south of France, ITER. Maybe we never master it, but these are interesting new things to discover. Maybe we can use space for energy and resources. Even big companies like SpaceX are doing that, Blue Origin. So everybody is looking to use space for all kinds of purposes, also for resources. Maybe the moon looks like this, but you never know. Maybe you can go as a tourist. Interesting. But can we go there? Can we save our planet just by going to space, to live there? These are our neighbors. Mercury, Venus, Mars. Mercury, too close to the sun, too hot. Venus is the sister of the Earth, closest, as big as the Earth, but it's a very nasty sister. It's 500 degrees Celsius, 100 atmosphere pressure, and the clouds consist of sulfuric acid. No place to put up your tent. Mars then, a bit smaller. We know a lot about Mars. We have beautiful robots walking around there, driving around, and people will go there for sure. But it's hostile. Minus 140, no oxygen, no liquid water, no magnetic field. So we can have some research there, but it's not a solution. We have to work on the ground. Exoplanets near other stars, too far out. The nearest is 10,000 kilometers flying. The only thing we have is this. Our oasis, our spaceship Earth. This is it. There's no planet B. It's a beautiful planet, but one problem, and that's us. 200,000 people per day, all wanting energy, all wanting clean water, all wanting food. We have to be smart and do things in balance with the planet. This is what is happening. Lots of people growing there, and no water, so drying up while the population growth is bigger in that area. We can decide to make one dirty city of our planet, and we are already busy. This is Beijing, for example. Pollution, plastic, getting in our food chain, overfishing, glaciers are disappearing, forests have to be supposed to look like this, look more and more like this, with big consequences for animal life, but also for the local population. We see monoculture, biodiversity is disappearing, monocultures. It's drying up because of these canals for the wood, huge fires, which you can see from space. So all these bad things, this is how you have to go to school now and then in Singapore. Erosion, all these things, like I showed from space, you can see from the ground, mud flows, bigger hurricanes, extreme weather. But you can do something about it. We can stop things. We discussed it already before. Make sure the water doesn't get out. Local things you can do. Make Africa greener. Lots of companies and initiatives there. Make sure that the water doesn't flush the fertile soil away. We have artificial meat, indoor farming, and of course all the new forms of energy that were already discussed here before. Sweet and salt water, wind, maybe thorium reactors in the far future again. Electric cars, we heard all the things passing by, and cleaner ships, because we can also make this kind of planet. a pleasant planet for ourselves. We share it with all kinds of other animals. It's not our planet. These are all going to be extinct if we're not careful, so we have to be very careful. Beautiful planet, and we have to take care of it. And with your activities and initiatives, I have still good hope that we can do that. Thank you very much.
Nos queda claro después de este viaje de 90 minutos que si no actuamos con premura, las consecuencias del cambio climático podrían ser dramáticas. Como sabemos, el IPCC, el Grupo Intergubernamental de Expertos de Cambio Climático, han comunicado que afrontar el calentamiento global es un código rojo para la humanidad. La verdad es que todo esto me recuerda a mi época de juventud, de universitaria. Vamos, desde luego el sitio me lo recuerda, en medio de la ciudad universitaria. Pero no es por eso, es porque vengo de una familia de una larga tradición en ingenieros de montes y en ciencias ambientales. Y me educaba rodeada de palabras como estudio de impacto ambiental, control de emisiones, defensa y mejora de los ecosistemas, que todo ello, la verdad, que me sonaba a ciencia ficción. Pero la famosa frase del cuento, que viene el lobo, que viene, se está cumpliendo. Yo creo que mi padre debe estar perplejo al ver a su hija, escucharla, sí, aquella que rompió la tradición familiar de ingenieros por hacerse economista, hablar con postura firme sobre cambio climático, inversión sostenible y cuidado del planeta. Ante todo, quería agradecer a todos los que estáis aquí con nosotros, a nuestros clientes, por vuestro apoyo ahora y siempre. Es un lujo veros las caras después de todo lo vivido juntos. También quería agradecer, I would like to thank you to all the speakers today for sharing their knowledge, their experience. It's a great present for me, for us, to keep learning with you. I would like also to honor, on behalf of all, the presence of Karen van Barbeek, our next CEO. For being here, Karen, it means a lot to the teams, to us, and the commitment of Robeco towards our clients. And I would like to give a special thank you to our current CEO, Gilbert van Hassel. It is an honor, Gilbert, that you are able to say bye to Robeco, not to us, in this place in Madrid and in front of this wonderful audience. Thank you so much. We wish you all the best in your new journey to the US and hope you keep visiting us. Como sabéis, Robeco es una de las gestoras líderes en sostenibilidad. Llevamos proclamando las bondades de la sostenibilidad desde hace más de 20 años, integrándolas en todos nuestros procesos de inversión desde hace más de 10 años. Es que nada de esto es nuevo para Robeco. De hecho, hace un año, 12 de diciembre del 2020, nos comprometimos e impulsamos la iniciativa Net Zero Asset Managers, comprometiéndonos a que todos nuestros activos bajo gestión serían neutrales en carbono para el año 2050. Y es que, como decía mi compañero Javier, al que nos llevamos efectivamente, como decía él, 15 años de compañeros, pero decía al principio de este viaje que estamos presenciando un momento histórico único. Y eso es así. Viene al hilo la reflexión de un psiquiatra conocido, un psiquiatra austriaco, Viktor Frankl, en su libro El hombre en busca del sentido, que recuerdo decía algo como: la grandeza de la vida es precisamente darle un sentido, actuando con habilidad, con valor, con conducta adecuada a lo que nos ocurra. Y es que la libertad tiene que ir acompañado de la responsabilidad, y eso es lo que yo creo que nos está pidiendo a cada uno de nosotros la vida en este momento. Somos conscientes que el ser humano es capaz de construir y destruir al mismo tiempo. Lo ha demostrado a lo largo de la historia. Pero este es el año de la cooperación, de la buena gobernanza, del COP26, que supuestamente iba a marcar un punto de inflexión en esta carrera al net zero. Lo que está claro es que esta situación en la que nos encontramos y de las que muchos ingenuamente culpan al progreso, será precisamente este mismo progreso el que nos saque de esta situación, como ha venido ocurriendo. Han pasado muchos años desde que el hombre, el ser humano, se encomendaba únicamente a la providencia. El progreso le ha permitido coger las riendas, muchas veces con acierto y otras no con tanto. La inacción no nos conduce a ningún sitio. Un estado estacionario es una utopía. Además, el coste de no hacer nada es bastante relevante. Estamos hablando de un coste del 3% anual del PIB. Estamos hablando de 1,8 billones de personas sufriendo escasez de agua, 800 millones de personas en riesgo por subidas del nivel del mar y 43 millones de personas migrando de países emergentes por condiciones climáticas extremas. Y efectivamente, en este panorama de riesgos múltiples e interconectados, tenemos que buscar, cómo no, las oportunidades. Es que ese es el camino que nos toca andar ahora. Y yo os puedo hablar del camino del net zero, donde se van a necesitar 150 trillones de dólares de aquí a los próximos 30 años. Es que eso es 2 veces el PIB actual. Se van a crear 42 millones de empleos en economía verde y un planeta más limpio que va a traer consigo, sin lugar a duda, oportunidades sin precedentes. Y es que este camino al net zero no es una cuestión de blancos, no es una cuestión de blanco o negro. Aquí los grises tienen mucho que aportar. Necesitamos el apoyo de los gobiernos, pero por supuesto que necesitamos el apoyo del mercado de capitales, donde nos encontramos cada uno de nosotros. Como inversores, asegurémonos de que nuestros activos se ponen a trabajar en la dirección de una recuperación sostenible, seleccionando muy bien dónde invertimos, dónde ponemos nuestro capital, interactuando con las empresas para que mejoren sus prácticas sociales y medioambientales. Eso es esencial para Robeco como compañía. Y no nos olvidemos de apoyar una transición justa. Así lo reconoce también el Acuerdo de París. Interesante y motivante. Así lo debemos entender y así debemos ponerlo en práctica. Decía un gran filósofo alemán, Nietzsche, que quien tiene un porqué para vivir puede soportar casi cualquier cómo. Tenemos un porqué y espero que a lo largo del día de hoy hayamos podido descubrir un poquito más ese cómo. Become sustainable, recorramos el camino. Muchísimas gracias.